They thought a $500 fine would scare me into shutting off my Christmas lights, but instead, it sparked a battle that turned my entire neighborhood upside down. The HOA called me reckless, they tried to shame me in front of my neighbors, and they even threatened to drag me into court. But what started as one man's simple decorations for his daughter quickly grew into the brightest holiday light display in the entire state, and the beginning of the HOA's downfall. Stay until the end, because you won't believe how far the HOA went to stop me, and how spectacularly they failed. It started with a letter in my mailbox, stamped with the smug seal of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association. The kind of envelope that carried bad news dressed up as community standards. I didn't even need to open it to know the tone. It would be clipped, polite on the surface, dripping with passive-aggressive superiority underneath. And sure enough, as I tore it open and unfolded the neatly typed page, my eyes caught the words, violation, excessive, and fine. They were fining me $200 for improper holiday illumination. Improper. I stood in my living room, staring out the window at my modest string of white lights draped across the porch rail, a glowing wreath on the front door, and a single reindeer figure in the yard. Nothing flashy, nothing blinding, just enough to remind me that Christmas still meant something, even after a hard year of layoffs, bills, and endless HOA harassment. I sank into the couch, the letter trembling in my hand. My daughter Emily padded into the room in her fuzzy socks, clutching the hot chocolate we'd made together. She was 10, with that bright-eyed wonder that only kids carry during December. "Did Santa write you back?" she asked with a grin. I forced a smile, folding the paper quickly so she wouldn't see. "Not Santa, sweetheart. Just boring grown-up stuff." But inside, something cracked. Because all she wanted that year was to feel Christmas again. Her mother and I had divorced the spring before, leaving our little house quieter, lonelier. The lights, the music, the smell of pine candles, I was trying to fill the emptiness for her. And the HOA, with their smug rules and self-appointed superiority, thought they could take that from us. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up with the letter in hand. Delilah, the president, there's always a Delilah in these stories, sat at the head of the folding table, pearls around her neck, lips pursed like she was sucking on a lemon. Around her sat the rest of the board, nodding like obedient bobbleheads. "I need to understand why I was fined," I said, holding the paper aloft. "All I did was put up a few porch lights and a wreath. Half the street has more than I do." Delilah didn't blink. "It's not about quantity. It's about conformity. The board voted years ago that only approved decorations, in approved colors, can be displayed. White icicle lights, wreaths of a certain diameter, no inflatables. You, Mr. Parker, have reindeer. That's not permitted." The room chuckled softly. Some of the neighbors avoided my gaze, embarrassed. Others smirked, enjoying the show. "You're telling me my daughter's reindeer decoration violates community standards?" I asked, my voice rising. Delilah leaned forward. "Rules are rules. If we make one exception, the neighborhood will turn into a carnival of tacky lights. We are preserving property values. If you don't like it, perhaps Evergreen Hills isn't the right community for you." The smugness in her tone lit a fire in me. Something about the way she dismissed not just me, but my daughter's joy, ignited a defiance I didn't know I had. I didn't argue further. I just folded the letter back into my pocket, walked out of the community center, and stepped into the cold December night. Above me, the stars sparkled faintly against the dark. And in that moment, an idea sparked brighter than any Christmas bulb. If they wanted to fine me for a single reindeer and a string of lights, then I would give them something worth fining me for. I would build the brightest, boldest, most unforgettable Christmas display the state had ever seen. Not out of spite, but out of love, for my daughter, for the magic they wanted to smother, and for everyone in that neighborhood tired of living under the HOA's iron grip. The next morning, I pulled out my dusty notebook from the garage, the one I used back in college when I dreamed of becoming an engineer. On the blank page, I sketched rows of lights cascading from the roof, a synchronized display of colors, towering candy canes, a sleigh that glowed like fire, and speakers that would pipe Christmas music across the block. A vision of something grand, something impossible to ignore. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Money was tight, and time was short. But I had determination, and I had community connections. My brother-in-law owned a hardware store, an old friend ran a landscaping business. I started making calls, asking for favors, promising payback down the road. To my surprise, many of them said yes. They were tired of war stories too, and they loved the idea of helping me stick it to them. Nights turned into late-night projects. Emily stayed up with me, entangling wires, testing bulbs, and sipping cocoa by the garage heater. "Is this really okay, Dad?" she asked one night, her small hands sorting colored lights. "Won't the wa get mad again?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Oh, they'll be furious. But sometimes, kiddo, you have to stand up to bullies. Even if they wear suits and pearls instead of schoolyard clothes." She giggled, then nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. For the first time since the divorce, I saw her truly happy again. By mid-December, the bones of the display were ready. Neighbors started noticing the activity, drifting over to ask questions. When I explained, most of them grinned and offered help. Some brought extension cords, others ladders, even spare boxes of lights from their attics. Soon it wasn't just me and Emily working, it was half the block. And with every added strand of lights, the rebellion grew. Delilah, of course, noticed. One afternoon she marched onto my lawn, clipboard in hand, her heels sinking into the frosty grass. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pointing at the half-strung canopy of lights over my roof. I looked down from the ladder, sweat on my brow, hammer in hand. "Decorating for Christmas," she sniffed. "This is far beyond acceptable. I'll have you know the board is already drafting additional fines. Daily fines. You could lose your house over this nonsense." Behind me, two neighbors chuckled. Another gave a thumbs up. For once, Delilah wasn't surrounded by nodding heads, she was outnumbered. "Then you'd better get your pen ready," I said evenly. "Because I'm not stopping." Her face turned crimson. She sputtered, spun on her heel, and stormed back down the street. That night, Emily and I stood in the yard, watching the skeleton of our dream taking shape. Wires sprawled like veins across the lawn, inflatables half inflated, towers of candy canes waiting to be lit. It was chaos, it was messy, and it was perfect. "Dad," Emily whispered, clutching my arm, "this is going to be the best Christmas ever." And as I looked out at the growing rebellion against the law, I knew she was right. The first test run happened on a Thursday night, just before the weekend when we planned to unveil it to the neighborhood. I flipped the main breaker in the garage, my heart pounding as if I were about to launch a rocket. One by one, the strings of lights across the roof blinked alive, glowing red, green, and gold. The candy canes along the walkway pulsed in unison. The sleigh and reindeer glowed as if they'd been forged from fire. And then the music started, synchronized perfectly with the lights, each beat making the display dance. Emily gasped so loudly I thought she might faint. "Dad, it's magic." Her eyes reflected the lights as if she were seeing Christmas for the very first time. The neighbors who had gathered to watch clapped and cheered, some even wiping tears from their eyes. I couldn't help but grin. It wasn't finished, not yet, but the bones of our masterpiece were alive. Of course, Delilah showed up within minutes. Like a moth to flame, she couldn't resist. She marched down the sidewalk in her fur coat, her pearls gleaming even in the flashing red and green glow. She looked like the ghost of Christmas disapproval. "This is a disgrace," she shouted over the music, her voice shrill. "You're disturbing the peace. Do you think this is Las Vegas? This is a residential community." I turned to her calmly. "It's not finished yet. You might want to save your outrage for Saturday night." Her jaw dropped. "Saturday night? You mean to tell me you plan to go bigger than this?" I nodded. "Much bigger." The neighbors laughed and clapped again, and Delilah's face twisted as if she'd bitten into spoiled eggnog. She stormed off, muttering threats about fines, lawsuits, and calling the authorities. But the damage was done. Word spread like wildfire. By Friday, people from outside our block were driving by just to see the half-finished spectacle. Kids pressed their noses to the car windows. Couples held hands and whispered about how magical it looked already. For the first time, Evergreen Hills felt alive. That night, Emily and I stayed up late finishing the final touches. We climbed ladders to hang more strings of lights, stapled stars to the eaves, and wired speakers into the bushes. At one point, I slipped and nearly tumbled off the ladder, but a neighbor caught me just in time. "We've got your back," he said, steadying me. And I realized, it wasn't just my fight anymore. The whole community was invested. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the kind of crisp December evening when your breath fogs in the air. By dusk, dozens of families gathered on the lawn across the street, bundled in scarves and hats. Cars lined the block. Someone even set up a cocoa stand. Delilah appeared too, of course. Clipboard in hand, she barked orders at the board members who trailed behind her like nervous elves. She was determined to catch me breaking some law. But the crowd barely noticed her, they were waiting for the show. Emily tugged my sleeve. "Dad, can I do it? Can I flip the switch?" I knelt, brushing her hair back. "You sure can. This is your Christmas too." Her little hands trembled as she reached for the breaker. I crouched beside her, whispering, "Ready." She nodded, and with one push, the world exploded into light. The entire house ignited in a symphony of color. Lights cascaded from the roof like waterfalls, sweeping across the lawn in waves. Giant candy canes pulsed like a heartbeat. The sleigh soared with glowing reindeer as if mid-flight. And then the music kicked in, classic carols remixed into a dazzling light show that danced perfectly in sync. The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers. Children squealed with delight, couples hugged, and even some of the board members' jaws dropped open. Phones flew into the air, capturing every second. Emily clapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide. "Dad, it's beautiful." I put my arm around her. "No, kiddo. You're beautiful. This is for you." Delilah, meanwhile, was practically foaming at the mouth. She shouted into her phone, waving wildly at the display. "Yes, I need a patrol car immediately. This man is violating every ordinance in the book. Noise pollution, light pollution, public nuisance." But the police never came. Not that night. Instead, more cars rolled in, strangers hopping out to join the crowd. A local reporter appeared with a camera, interviewing neighbors who gushed about the Christmas miracle. By the end of the evening, my modest home had become a beacon. People were already planning to return the next night, telling their friends, sharing photos online. The HOA had tried to snuff out a simple reindeer, but now they'd unleashed the brightest display in the state. That night, long after the crowd dispersed, I tucked Emily into bed. She clutched her stuffed snowman, her cheeks still flushed with excitement. "Dad," she whispered sleepily, "do you think Mom would have liked it?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. I swallowed hard, smoothing her blanket. "I think she would have loved it," I said softly. Her eyes fluttered shut, and within minutes she was asleep, dreaming beneath the glow of the lights that still danced outside her window. Downstairs, I sat alone in the living room, watching the kaleidoscope of colors flicker through the curtains. And I realized, it wasn't just about Christmas anymore. It was about standing up to the people who thought they could control joy, crush memories, and silence us. This was about showing my daughter, and everyone, that sometimes, the best revenge is light in the darkest of places. Of course, Delilah wasn't finished. The next morning, I found 3 new letters crammed into my mailbox, each one more venomous than the last. Fines, threats, demands for immediate removal. She even accused me of endangering aircraft with excessive luminescence. But I barely had time to laugh before the phone rang. It was the local news station. They wanted to cover the display live. "Sir, we've had dozens of calls about your Christmas lights," the producer said. "People are calling it the brightest in the state. Can we send a crew out tonight?" I grinned, leaning back in my chair. "You'd better bring sunglasses." The moment my house lit up brighter than a stadium, I knew the wall would strike back harder than ever. And I was right. The very next morning, I opened my mailbox to find not one but 3 separate violation notices, each one thicker than the last, stacked together like a hateful holiday gift. Delilah, the self-appointed queen of Evergreen Hills, had tripled my fines overnight. According to her, my egregious use of electrical wattage violated noise ordinances, light pollution laws, and some bizarre clause she dug up about visual harmony. The numbers scrawled in bold at the bottom were staggering: $9,450 in fines. All for Christmas lights. I stood in my driveway with those letters trembling in my hands while my daughter Emily ran past me, giggling as she showed the neighbors the glowing candy cane arches that had appeared overnight. She didn't understand the threat. She didn't need to. She just saw joy, wonder, and community coming back to life in a neighborhood that had been silent for too long. I couldn't take that away from her. Delilah stormed down the street, heels clacking like gunfire against the pavement. "You think this is funny?" She barked, waving a clipboard like a sword. Do you understand that your little light show is endangering property values? You're turning our neighborhood into a circus attraction. Behind her, I saw something remarkable: neighbors quietly gathering, standing on porches, watching. Normally, they'd keep their heads down when Delilah spoke, but now, they whispered to each other, and I caught small smirks, subtle nods. They weren't afraid anymore. The lights had done something. I'm not endangering property values, I shot back, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. I'm reminding people what Christmas feels like. And if you think I'm paying a single cent of these fake fines, you're in for a surprise. Her face flushed crimson. Then I'll take you to court. I'll have the sheriff at your door by Christmas Eve. She spun on her heel and stomped away, but her threats rang hollow now. Because that night, the entire state would learn what was happening in Evergreen Hills. It started small. A neighbor's nephew filmed a TikTok of Emily flipping the giant switch that lit up the front yard, complete with synchronized music blasting from hidden speakers. The video exploded online overnight, reaching hundreds of thousands of views. By the weekend, news crews were parked down the block, cameras capturing the glow that could be seen from the highway. Cars lined up for miles, families pouring out to walk through the dazzling tunnels of light I had built, their faces glowing in awe. Reporters swarmed me for interviews, asking why I defied my HOA. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them the truth, that they fined me for trying to bring my daughter a little joy, that they tried to stamp out Christmas, and that I refused to let a group of bullies control how families celebrated the season. That raw honesty struck a nerve. Suddenly, my story was everywhere. Delilah panicked. She called an emergency HOA meeting inside the clubhouse, but instead of loyal board members, she found a room packed with angry homeowners demanding answers. One neighbor, Mr. Jefferson, slammed his fist on the table. You fined a man for Christmas lights while the rest of us just wanted to smile again. Who do you think you are? Another stood up and shouted, if you shut him down, you'll have to shut us all down. Delilah tried to regain control, but it was too late. The people had spoken. The HOA's grip was slipping, and she knew it. That's when she escalated to her most desperate move yet. She contacted the local power company, demanding they shut off my electricity due to overconsumption. I'll never forget the night the power company truck rolled down the street, its headlights cutting through the crowd gathered in my yard. Gasps spread as a worker in a reflective vest approached me with a clipboard. My heart sank. Was it all about to end right here? But instead of unplugging me, the man handed me a letter. Sir, he said, almost smiling, we've been asked to cut your power. But the governor's office has given us different instructions. They want you to keep the lights on. In fact, they'd like to sponsor the energy bill for the rest of the season. The crowd erupted into cheers. Emily hugged my leg so tight I thought she'd never let go. And me, I felt tears sting my eyes. Not because I had won against Delilah, but because what started as one man's rebellion had become something far greater, a movement, a reminder of the spirit of Christmas. Delilah didn't give up quietly. She screamed, she threatened lawsuits, she even tried to call in police officers to declare the light show a public hazard. But when the officers arrived, they didn't shut me down. Instead, they asked if their kids could walk through the display. Watching her jaw drop as uniformed officers strolled through candy cane arches was the sweetest revenge I could have ever asked for. By Christmas Eve, Evergreen Hills was unrecognizable. The streets overflowed with people, neighbors, tourists, families who had driven hours just to see the lights. The air buzzed with laughter, hot cocoa stands popped up on lawns, and Emily handed out candy canes to children who squealed with delight. For one night, our neighborhood wasn't ruled by fear or fines. It was alive with joy, unity, and light. And then came the announcement that sealed Delilah's fate. A state senator appeared on live television, standing in front of my glowing house. He praised the display as the brightest Christmas light show in the state and declared it an official holiday tradition, protected by law as a community event. The camera cut to Delilah lurking in the shadows, her face twisted in defeat. When I flipped the switch that night, lighting up millions of bulbs synchronized to music that echoed across the valley, I didn't just see Christmas lights. I saw freedom. I saw a community reborn. I saw my daughter's face illuminated with happiness I thought she had lost forever. Delilah resigned from the HOA weeks later. Nobody missed her. The HOA itself crumbled under the weight of lawsuits and abandoned leadership. What rose in its place wasn't a board or a rulebook but a community bound together by resilience and defiance. And every year since, we've kept the lights burning brighter and brighter, not just for us, but for anyone who's ever felt bullied into silence. Standing in the yard that Christmas night, with Emily on my shoulders waving to the crowd, I realized something powerful. They could find me, threaten me, and try to crush me, but they could never dim the light of a father's love or a community's spirit. And in the end, that was brighter than any bulb on my house. The HOA fined me for Christmas lights. I answered with the brightest display in the state. And I'd do it all again.